But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away, so too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together, one will be taken and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this: if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We read this passage on the first Sunday of Advent as a message of hope. Yet I would guess many of us recognize the images of this passage as ones that have been used to strike fear rather than bring hope. Jesus' words here are sometimes used as a warning about an impending rapture. They're used to present the question, are you saved, in a rather terrifying way. There will be two in the field, one taken, one left. Which one will you be? However, as Presbyterian theologian Cynthia Rigby reminds us, when it comes to apocalyptic biblical literature, our tradition of Reformed theology places emphasis not on a threat of being left behind, but on the promise of Christ's return. Rigby writes, in direct contrast to an idea that if we do not do what it takes to get ready for a rapture, we will be left behind, the Reformed understanding of the end times focuses on Christian hope for the world, which is found in God's outlandish promise to be with us no matter what. Even when appearances seem to argue to the contrary, she says, we have not been left behind. This world is not a testing ground for the real world to come, but the place in which God promises ever to be with us. To be people of hope is to cling to the promise that we have not been abandoned, regardless of our circumstances. When we read Jesus' words today with our emphasis on God's promise to be with us, I think the central idea of the passage becomes clearer. And the central idea actually isn't a question, are you saved? I think the central idea is that we do not get to have control over Christ's entry into our lives and into this world. We don't get to schedule it. We don't get to say how, when, where, or through whom. Our convenience and our preferences have nothing to do with it. Those images Jesus is using are meant to highlight our lack of control, our vulnerability in the face of God's good promise to be with us. So, if Jesus' words here do invite us into vulnerability and loss of control, the interpretations about being left behind might actually work to decline the invitation of the passage, the true invitation, because I think they function as an attempt to hold on to control. Those readings allow us to stay focused on our own actions. They invite us to ask, well, what concrete things can I do to be assured of my salvation so I can read this passage from comfort and safety, believing that it is a warning for other people. In a similar way, we see our human desire to exert control over God's uncontrollable promise in the fact that people keep trying to literally schedule the second coming. We've all lived through dates that one group or another promised would be the end of time. I think all of it reveals how uncomfortable we are with Jesus' invitation into vulnerability. When the passage says, therefore you must be ready, I believe a large piece of that readiness is surrendering to our vulnerability before a God over whom we do not have control. Can we relinquish the need for control, the need for certainty, the need to have it all our own way? Here at the beginning of Advent, it is time to embrace vulnerability because hope is vulnerable. Have you noticed that? How profoundly vulnerable hope is? Brené Brown, who is widely known for her research on shame, vulnerability, and courage, found something striking while conducting interviews. She found that most of us will often choose to rehearse pain and loss rather than embrace the vulnerability of sacred hope and joy. Now, that might sound surprising to you, but I suspect it's actually familiar. Here are some ways the rehearsal of loss can look. You're having a wonderful time with your kids or grandkids, and then you're suddenly imagining them growing up and losing all interest in spending time with you. Or you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table with loved ones and your heart is bursting with joy, and then suddenly you're anxiously thinking about who might pass away before the next Thanksgiving, who might not be at the table this time next year. These ways of thinking are very common. Rather than embrace moments of sacred joy, we emotionally jump ahead to their loss. The reason we do this, Brown says, is to try to protect ourselves, to guard our hearts from vulnerability. It's as if we think that we can rehearse pain enough so that it won't catch us. We think if we mentally rehearse loss and disappointment well enough, we'll be ready and the pain won't break us. In Brown's lecture on this, she then gestures towards those listening and says, but here's the thing. In a room like this one, there are a good number of people who have already had to live through those worst losses imaginable, and what they would tell all of us is there's no rehearsing it. Defending our hearts against the vulnerability of joy doesn't actually protect us. Rehearsing pain is never to our gain. It is only a loss. So I wonder if that kind of self-protection is also at work in those popular readings of this passage that see it only as a threat. Do so many read the passage as a warning of loss and punishment because it is too beautiful, too wonderful, too vulnerable to let ourselves embrace the hope of the promise that in the end God will break into this world with glory, goodness, grace, and truth, and we could not control, schedule, or stop it if we tried? Is it too beautiful, too wonderful, too vulnerable to let ourselves believe that in the end, the promises of our Advent scriptures will be fulfilled? Swords really will be beaten into plowshares, and no one will hurt or destroy on all God's holy mountain? What if a central part of our preparation for Jesus in this season is to unlearn our attempts to protect ourselves from pain, to unlearn those rehearsals of loss, and instead to practice being people who open our hearts to embrace the vulnerability of hope? If you're wondering, how on earth can we practice such a thing? That is a very good question. Ministry has taught me a small part of the answer. One of the ways we practice embracing our vulnerability before the presence of God is through rituals. Now, if the word ritual sounds boring to you, please don't settle into your morning nap just yet. At one point in my life, I thought rituals meant only the loftiest of church things, a priest in a fancy robe doing something mysterious and untouchable, but I was wrong. Rituals can happen anywhere. And far from being about something untouchable, rituals, I think, are about turning towards the sacred, even reaching out to touch the sacred. I've come to understand a ritual as an action we take when we recognize we are vulnerable in the presence of the sacred. In a ritual, we turn towards the sacred, embracing our vulnerability and taking a tangible, visible action to honor an invisible reality. Let me give you an example. Just before I moved out of my childhood home in Arkansas to head to college in Kentucky, my dad took me on a long drive at sunset through the country roads we had driven together many times across my life. That was one of the main ways my family spent special time together. We went driving on those roads, especially at sunset and into the early evening. It was beautiful and heartbreaking to make this sort of final drive. We knew it marked the end of a precious era, and we knew the lands we loved were always at risk of being developed. On that drive, I could feel powerful emotions threatening to overwhelm me, and I felt the temptation to push them all away, shove it down, and pretend this is just a drive like any other. But my dad didn't let me do that. Instead, he invited me into a ritual. I don't think he thought of it that way, but that is what he did when he slowed the truck to a stop, turned and looked at me and asked, "Do you want to fly?" Somehow I knew what he meant, and it wasn't to go off speeding at a crazy mile per hour. I crawled out of my seat and into the truck bed, and as he began to drive slowly down those familiar roads, I stood up and leaned against the cab, looked out over the sunset, and lifted my arms up from my sides to feel the wind. It was an overwhelmingly powerful, beautiful, and vulnerable moment for me. I surrendered to the truth that those drives, that place, were sacred gifts from God. I did not have control over them. I could not possess them forever, but I could allow the truth of their sacredness to wash over me. I could turn towards that sacred gift. I could reach out my arms to touch it, to embrace it, to bless it. So that's how I've come to understand rituals, actions where we acknowledge the sacred, turn towards it, embrace it. If you start to think of rituals in this way, I believe you will be moved to start noticing them everywhere. You will see them at the baptismal font, you will see them at the communion table, yes, but you will also see them in the goodnight hugs and kisses that parents give their children. You will see rituals in people who pause frequently to admire the beauty of the world, birds and trees and windows filled with light. You will see rituals in those people who keep a calendar of everyone's birthday so that they can call and write letters. Rituals of hope are happening everywhere, and they matter. Turning towards God's holy presence in our midst matters. The Advent season is full of beautiful rituals. We light an Advent wreath. We pull out these beautiful blue paraments. We hang the greens and put up special chrismon ornaments. And we even put on silly costumes and pretend to be sheep, angels, and shepherds. And of course, on Christmas Eve, we will light our candles and lift them up together, singing Silent Night. To recognize all of these acts as rituals is to remember that we don't just do them for the sake of tradition. We don't just do these things because we've always done them, and we don't just do these things to reenact something that happened long ago. We do these rituals because we believe Christ's presence is breaking into the world here, now, today. We believe that Christ's hope is meeting us here, now, today. And we are called to be people who turn towards that holy inbreaking, turn towards it, lean forward, reach out. One of the rituals of this congregation I have heard about that just moves me is that on Christmas Eve, after singing Silent Night, you carry your candles out through the narthex and onto the lawn, and then in the darkness, look up to see that gorgeous stained glass nativity window shining out into the world. Even before I've gotten to join you in that ritual, I already love it. I love the idea of seeing the work of art we worship under every week differently on the night of Christ's birth. to go out and see it from a different angle at a different time of day, to see it as an image that not only blesses this space and this people, but also shines out into the world beyond. I believe on that special evening about 4 weeks from now, when we look up at that window, weather permitting, the image will look different to us than it does today. It will be transformed, not just by the change of our physical perspective, but because we have all been changed by the season. It will look different to us because our hearts will be ready to receive its hope in a new way. We will have practiced vulnerability, practiced turning towards rather than away from the sacred. This season, let us be transformed by God's presence as we practice rituals of hope together. Let us read the radically hopeful promises in Scripture. Light the candles of the Advent wreath. Let us help our children put on the halos and hold the shepherd's crooks. And on Christmas Eve, let us lift our candles high into the night. And through all of it, let us allow God to use this season to shape us into people who, when confronted with the glorious mystery of God's presence breaking into this world, do not turn away in defensive self-protection, but instead turn towards the sacred. People who say together with awe, Alleluia, thanks be to God. Amen.